Hey, I'm John Baranchok. You'll notice, well, you can't see it down there. There's a PhD behind my name. One of the things I like about Bigfoot is Bigfoot doesn't discriminate on educational level. Doesn't matter whether you've got a PhD, a master's, a bachelor's, high school dropout. I think Bigfoot represents a leveling field, so I try not to go heavily by the doctor title. Just call me John. And slide. So you gotta start every presentation with a joke. PhD. What does PhD stand for? Piled higher and deeper. Bullshit. Okay. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? One, but the light bulb really has to want to change. So, you know, education doesn't matter. It's your commitment to the field. I want to thank Wayne, Mannimal Research, Jasper for having me for this talk. I appreciate it. My disclosures are I do have a book for sale on Amazon. I have some copies here to sell at a discounted rate. I belong to Mannimal Research, and I've attended about 16 BFRO expeditions and 2 Kentucky BFRO expeditions. Scientific Bigfoot research joke, emphasis on question mark. The policeman sees a drunk man searching for something under the streetlight and asks what the drunk has lost. He says he's lost his keys, and they both look under the streetlight together. After a few minutes, the policeman asks if he's sure he lost his keys there, and the drunk replies, no, that he lost them in the park. The policeman asks, why is he searching here? And the drunk replies, this is where the light is. Okay. In a lot of ways, this is what we're doing with Bigfoot research. We've got people like Dr. Krantz and Dr. Meldrum who have highlighted the importance of footcasts in identifying Bigfoot. We got, I'm blocking on the Sierra tapes. Ron Moorhead to thank for putting us on to audio. Okay. There are people out there, pillars in the community, who have shined the light on these key things that represent Bigfoot and have been trying to be used to prove Bigfoot's existence. But in shining that light, I believe we've gotten so caught up in that we stopped looking for the keys in the dark areas. There's keys laying all around. We're looking with trail cams, we're looking with audio recordings, personal experiences. We got to start shining the light in other areas. Then, not that there's anything wrong with where the light has been shined, but we got to try shining the light in some other areas too. Find Bigfoot and prove Bigfoot's existence. Slide, please. For your consideration, the eye sees only what the mind is prepared to comprehend. If you can't imagine it, you can't see it or achieve it. If you can imagine it, you can achieve it. A lot of people don't believe in Bigfoot. They're not going to be able to have a Bigfoot experience until they can comprehend the concept. Neil deGrasse, one of the biggest problems with the world today is that we have large groups of people who will accept whatever they hear on the grapevine just because it suits their worldview, not because it's actually true or because they have evidence to support it. The really striking thing is that if it wouldn't take much more effort to establish the validity of most of these cases, but people prefer reassurance rather than research. The way I view the research community right now is we've got the phenomenologists. I don't know about you, but I joined these groups because I want to have a Bigfoot experience, and that's the most important thing to me. And then we've got the scientists, and I think we're frequently at war. If you'll hit the, we've got I think a lot of subjective phenomenological expeditions, like most typically go on, and it's blurred, but the little egg on the bottom is scientific expeditions. Very few people are doing true scientific expeditions that include experimentation in the field and that bring it the full cycle of the scientific method to data analysis and presentation. And my book promotes preparing yourself for Bigfoot expeditions and encounters by learning to recondition your fight-flight response. It's on automatic pilot, but you can gain control over it and learn to stay calm in the face of danger should you desire. And there are two or three chapters in my book dedicated to how you do that. And I actually have a script of my own stress inoculation experiences as an example of how you can use these techniques to learn to control your autonomic nervous system better. So we got to be able to stay calm and more objective, less bias in the face of an encounter. And I believe we need more knowledge. And that's the other part of my book. Scientific psychological concepts, how to use experimental design and statistics, because it's only through statistics that we'll ever be able to prove that Bigfoot exists scientifically. It's the only way to control for the biasing errors. Now, that doesn't mean that I think phenomenological research is trash. I think phenomenological research is very important because it serves as a foundation for where we need to shine the light, for where we need to do more scientific expeditions. Next slide. So what? Next slide. Okay, back up. How do we back up? Yeah, let's just keep it here. So I call this a model of the birth of a biased Bigfoot theory. We have a Class A or B sighting when we're out here. We have a stress response. If you've been learning to modulate your fight-flight reactions, there's going to be less bias in that stress response. If you've ever had a panic attack, if you've ever had a fight-flight response, you're not thinking very clearly during those times. Therefore, learning to control that fight-flight is important because the stress response leads to a large bias window. We're fearful of our lives, okay? That creates bias, and then a belief is expressed as theory. And this is where we begin to break down in terms of the scientific method. There's no experiential hypothesis testing on the theory. It just becomes this idea. And then the next time we have that same experience, we attribute it to Bigfoot, confirmation bias. The thing about bias is, it doesn't mean that you got the wrong answer every time. You can be biased and still come up with legitimate data. Sometimes it's going to lead to a Class A sighting, sometimes it may not. This is taken from the BFRO main page or page D. The use of subjective evaluation is what separates the legal perspective of witness testimony from the scientific perspective. Witness reports are considered anecdotal. I've been hearing lots of stories today. That's considered anecdotal evidence. It's considered anecdotal evidence by science mainly because they are not testable. Yet many scientists are wise enough to understand that an anecdotal evidence always precedes, it comes before and leads to the collection of scientific evidence. I'm skipping down. Thus, without the collection and evaluation of anecdotal evidence or indirect evidence, there would be no scientific discoveries at all. Sightings by themselves are not scientific evidence, but they are what lead to scientific evidence. The phenomenological perspective is the foundation for big scientific Bigfoot research, and we've got to begin to frame up that foundation by applying new technology and different ideas and thinking. If we can do that, I would hope we would kind of get closer to here, where there's a big overlap between the phenomenologic expeditions and the scientific expeditions. Heaven forbid, phenomenologists, experientialists get together with the scientists in the same expedition and join forces to try and enhance each other's research. And that, with a little bit of pure science and a little bit of pure phenomenologic, but we need more of an overlap between science and phenomenological research, and we need each other. The schism between the researchers that do scientific researchers, and the phenomenological researchers, there's hard feelings. We need to figure out to get a way to get past that so we can combine our efforts. Next slide. With a change in the model, now I've got a model of the birth of a scientific Bigfoot law. Now we've learned to control our autonomic nervous system. So when we have that stress response, we're less likely to have a fight-flight response. We're less likely to panic. We're less likely to be completely aroused to the point that it affects our thinking and reasoning and opens that. So a smaller bias window is opened for our observations. Here's where we begin to break down. A tentative hypothesis is born. The hypothesis is repeatedly tested experimentally. Depending on those test results, if they're negative, the hypothesis gets thrown out. And then we try different hypotheses. But we're testing and we're retesting our hypothesis 3 or 4 times before we get over to the left of a tentative theory. We're jumping from an observation over to the tentative theory. This is the way we're structuring our research right now. And we need to do hypothesis testing in between. And this doesn't mean, you know, I've got an idea on how to test for telepathy in Bigfoots. And the point being, it doesn't necessarily have to be something concrete. You can use experimental design to isolate that stuff and tap into those abilities. Next. And what's going to happen if you follow this model and you repeatedly test hypothesis, it's going to lead back to more Class A and B and C sightings, because we're going to be measuring what we're trying to measure rather than having to sort out all these other things that could be going on. Next slide. I hate to break it to you, but we are all bias machines. Our bodies are designed to make us biased. I believe we're spiritual beings within a corpuscular body. But we rely on our body and our central nervous system to experience our world. You'll go to the next slide. When you reach down into the fire and grab a hot log, the milliseconds it takes that experience to run from your fingertips up to your brain, that's called sensation. It's a raw experience. The millisecond your brain processes that sensation, it's called perception. Well, perception is informed by our life experience. We all have different perceptions of the same phenomena. So our life experience through the hardwiring of our central nervous system and peripheral nervous system make us biased right out of the gates, because our perceptions are informed by our history and our belief system and how we were raised as a child. Next slide. And here we have it. The brain and the spinal cord are the central nervous system. The nerves that run off the brain to our eyes, our salivary glands, our lungs, our heart, they're controlled by what's called the autonomic nervous system. You can think of it as the automatic nervous system. It's on an automatic pilot. It regulates our breathing, our hair growth, our skin flaking off, our heart beating. And that's happening through the peripheral nervous system. That's what's responsible for fight, flight. The sympathetic nervous system is the excitatory nervous system, the on switch when we have a panic attack, anxiety attack, fight, flight. We begin to breathe more shallow. Our eyes dilate. Evolutionary said our eyes dilate so that we can see the predators coming towards us more easily. We hold on to urine, we hold on to feces. We need to protect our vital organs. Once the threat has passed, the parasympathetic division kicks in and we calm down. This is how you recondition your fight-flight response. Through relaxation and meditation, you learn to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and shut down the fight-flight response or minimize it. Helps with panic attacks, a number of other things. Next slide. But the point there is we're hardwired to be biased. We can't avoid it. And that's why systematically recording your data and doing the statistical analysis and experimental design is important, because it controls for that bias. So we don't have to rely on our own opinions. The numbers tell us. Next one. Other Bigfoot bias creators. The Hawthorne effect. They've sent some experts into a factory to study the productivity of the company. Lo and behold, at the end of the study, the company became more productive while they were there. Just observing or measuring something influences the behavior of something else. When we pulled in here, or when other people put in here, they began to influence the essence of nature. I think that's part of what you were talking to. And so we got to remember that we're the aliens in this environment, but just the fact that we're here could potentially be changing Bigfoot's behavior. The Heisenberg principle, this is in physics. The more precisely the position of some particle is determined, the less precisely its momentum can be predicted from initial conditions and vice versa. Studying one aspect of molecular activity interferes with the other. When we measure ourselves as a wave, we can't figure out what we're doing as a particle, and vice versa. So that creates bias into us, because we're biasing Bigfoot behavior. Next one. Confirmation bias. The tendency to look for information that supports rather than rejects one's preconceptions, typically by interpreting evidence to confirm existing beliefs while rejecting or ignoring any conflicting data. It has the potential to run rampant in Bigfoot. The nice thing about the Bigfoot community is you don't need a PhD, you don't need a degree to be part of it. The ugly underbelly of that is we can get a lot of ideas going that may or may not be legitimate. Okay, next one. Investigator bias. This was touched on earlier peripherally. Subtle communication and cues from the investigator, words, tone of manner, gestures, and our assignment of tasks and responsibilities and queries of the expedition leader can lead to self-fulfilling prophecies. If you go on expeditions where it's primarily flesh and blood believers, that's going to become your perspective more likely than not. If you go on to groups that are paranormal or woo, and I don't use the word woo in a derogatory way, just in a descriptive way, you're more likely to follow that camp. People influence our opinions about this stuff, and we've got to be ready for it. The main characteristics, the old foot in the door technique of salesmen. I'm selling something, ma'am. No, I don't need any pots and pans. Come on, let me just show you this special thing. Sticks his foot in the door. Once you get your foot in the door, it causes something called cognitive dissonance. I don't want to buy something, but I let this guy in. I don't want to buy something, but I let this guy in. So maybe I want to buy something. certain situations demand certain responses. It's ironic you're here for this story, Gary, because Gary was the third person in this story. We went out, it was my first expedition, actually. Gary's a very experienced researcher. The guy we were with, who will remain anonymous, was a very experienced researcher. We're set up on a peninsula out looking over the valley. We hear the coyotes and we hear what could have been a Bigfoot scream within them. And then we're sitting, occasionally hear some rustling behind us. And I look up, and here comes a lightning bug. But lightning bugs, if you watch them, they hover. They kind of just float and hover. This thing was doing this. It was spinning circles and going all over the place like it was injured, I thought. So I pointed it out to the other investigator who was standing beside me. I said, look at that lightning bug dying. And about that time, it fizzled and went down to the ground, and its light went off. He said, that was a mini orb. It's a mini orb. Write it down. That's a mini orb. I knew it wasn't a mini orb. I knew it was a dying lightning bug. But I'm the rookie investigator. I write it down. After I write it down, right at the same time, him and I looked down at the ground where the orb was absorbed into the earth. And the lightning bug lit up one more time and its death froze. Okay? So this is how we can influence each other, you know, in the juice of a expedition. Next slide. Incredulity bias. Can I take over for a bit, Rebecca?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I need to sit down because of a medical condition. Incredulity bias is a belief or an opinion driven by one's sense of righteous incredulity. It's refusing to believe a concept or idea because it seems inconceivable based on your emotional reaction to it being beyond your consensus of reality. You guys that are woo and interested in woo, God bless you. Because what you get so often is this incredulity bias. What the F? There's no way that could be possible. 2 years ago at the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot conference, at the panel discussion, somebody asked one of the panelists, do you believe in Bigfoot telepathy? And the guy sat up in his chair, put his hand to his ear, concentrated, and said, did you get my response? That drew the appropriate laugh, but it also showed incredulity bias. It's so far out of his realm of conception that it can't be. Think about that first quote I read about for the eye to comprehend. What was it? You got to be able to imagine it before you can see it. You got to be open to the idea before you can experience it. And I think woo proponents have gotten a bad rap simply because much of what is discussed is so far out of the realm of our human experience that we can't believe it. There's no way it could be happening. I think we need to bring scientific research to that phenomena to tease it out. How can we truly call ourselves objective scientists when we offhandedly dismiss an idea or concept simply because it goes beyond our conceptualization of reality? Where would we be? I'm taking radiation treatments right now for cancer. You know, people died from radiation and they had no clue back in the day what was killing them. Atomic structures, molecular science, infectious disease. There are these microscopic things in the air that can kill you or make you sick. Yeah. If that's the attitude medical science took, and it took it for a while, towards those kind of things, where would medical science be today? So I think we've got to be open and willing to consider things. Oh boy, here we go. Anthropomorphism. The attribution of human characteristics or behavior to a god, animal, or object. Obviously, for our purposes, we're concerned about Bigfoot, whether it's, be they an object, animal, god, demon, or interdimensional or not. It's indeed rare to meet a Bigfoot researcher, in my opinion, that does not anthropomorphize. And I hope to convince you of that with the example of curiosity. You hear it, we heard it, and nothing against your speech. Every expedition I hear it on, Bigfoots are curious. It may be, but let's look at some instinctual explanations: stalking, play, pursuit predation, ambush predation. These are instincts that are hardwired into the animal's nervous system, just like our fight-flight response is. And that can explain curiosity. Guarding behavior, maternal instincts, submission behavior, aggression behavior, denial, revenge, trial loyalty, fear, procreation. Again, all these are instincts. All these are hardwired and could produce similar behavior to what we call curiosity. Do I think Bigfoots are curious? I do. Can I prove they're curious? Not right now. I think we need to move from supposition and belief to knowledge through experimentation. I've already talked about cognitive dissonance a little bit, an unpleasant psychological state resulting from inconsistencies between two or more elements. It creates a hypersense of arousal. Again, the autonomic nervous system kicking in, you're primed for the fight-flight response. Bigfoot expeditions are a cognitive dissonance garden. It's consistently evoked. What was that I just saw? What was that sound? Did you hear it, see it, feel it, smell it? The animals in the wood are so quiet. There's an inconsistency there between those things in our mind, and that creates that arousal. The dissonant psyche drives us forward to answer these questions. We've got to resolve that dissonance, that uncomfortableness, and so we grab onto something that helps us do that. But again, because our perception is informed by our life experiences, what we grab onto might be somebody else's perception or explanation, and it may or may not be accurate. It runs the risk of bias. Other bias. We're going to talk about after images, the Mueller illusion, figure ground phenomena, visual and auditory pareidolia, and other auditory illusions. This one, if you stare at it at the dot in the center, I think it's for 30 seconds, and then you look at a white piece of paper, you're going to see the flag on it in black and white rather than yellow and green. It's an after image left in our brain. This next one is real important for us out in the field. Which line is longer, A or B? Anybody? Throw it out. It could only be. They're the same. The arrows on the outside of A make the line itself look longer, and when those arrows are turned inward, it affects your perception of the length of the line. How is this relevant to Bigfoot? Estimating distance. Standing between two trees. You know, how can you estimate it when you have this kind of influence? Another one of my favorites for expeditions is this. What do you see? There you go. Some people see a cup. Some people see two faces facing each other like they're about to talk to each other. This is called figure ground phenomena. And we use it every night when we go out on an expedition. We run the risk of experiencing this. We sit at the bottom of a ridge. It's a moonlit night. We look up on the ridge where the trees are up there, and we look for the Bigfoot in between the trees. Well, the trees can become the figure, or the trees can become the ground. And depending on which one is figure or ground, you may be able to see something that looks like a Bigfoot that's not actually a Bigfoot. That doesn't mean that it's not a Bigfoot. These are things we need to sort through and be aware of to eliminate as a possibility before we say, yeah, we saw a Bigfoot. visual pareidolia, excuse me. Normal fire, but you can see the demon in the shape of the fire. Okay. Huh? Yeah. So a lot of people with fundamental religious beliefs saw this and said that it was a sign that the devil or a demon was responsible for things. Shots the faces on the moon. They look like faces or masks to me. They're just mounds of hills of material. Here's my favorite one. Find the Bigfoots. Let's go over it square by square. Is there a Bigfoot in this square?
Yes.
This square?
I'd say A3.
A3 here?
Yeah.
Okay. That almost looks like a, I think, Dogman when I see that. Just pick out the squares where you think the Bigfoots are.
And there's a green face at B1. Yeah, right there, green face.
Yeah.
Yeah. This slide, by the way, is from Charlie Raymond, who runs expeditions out of Kentucky. They're all bogus. There's no Bigfoot in this picture. But if you look hard enough, eventually you'll find one, whether there's one there or not. Auditory illusions, I learned, there's an expert in sound here. I just want to touch on these briefly. These are all computer generated. Two simultaneously sounds, one in your right ear, one on your left ear, produce an illusion of a third sound. So it's theoretically possible if we've got Bigfoots on either side of us going back and forth, and then we hear a third one, that could be an illusion, and there still could just be two. Okay? The friends in effect. You hear a sound originating from a directional source no longer producing the sound. Is that Bigfoot on the right or the left side of it? The Deutsch scale illusion. In effect, we hear a directional location of a sound based on where the source is closest to us. We're likely to hear a Bigfoot howl when it's closer to us than the one in the distance. Again, we're trying to track ourselves. We're trying to follow this direction. The glissando illusion. We hear ourselves being surrounded by multiple sound sources when it's only one at a given time. So there can be two Bigfoots sounding off, and it could sound like they're all around you. Okay? Forget about computer-generated illusions. Ape calls, coyotes, fox screams, horse snuffles, raccoons, big cat growl, elephant bear. And I highly recommend going to the Elephant Project's website and listening to that elephant bellow, both for its potential, not ultrasound, infrasound, thank you. That elephant bellow, if you close your eyes, I dare you to distinguish between an elephant bellow and we don't have that problem in this part of the world, differentiating that, but some other important definitions: sentient versus self-aware, confabulation, coincidence versus correlation versus causality, and sightings to wrap up. Sentient, able to perceive or feel things. Is Bigfoot sentient? Another definition, sentience is defined as able to experience feelings, responsiveness or consciousness of sense of impressions, and capable of feeling things through physical senses. Sentient beings experience wanted emotions like happiness, joy, gratitude, and unwanted emotions. Honestly, before I did the research for this book, I would have argued that Bigfoots were not sentient. But once I read what sentient meant, and its connection to the nervous system, there's no doubt in my mind that Bigfoot is sentient. Declaring consciousness, non-human animals, including mammals, birds, and other creatures, including octopuses, also possesses neurologic substrates. Or could have included fish. Fish, sentient. Non-sentient beings. First, we should include those that do not possess a nervous system. Things like sponges, or things that the nervous system is not centralized. Non-sentient animals include sponges, corals, anemones, and hybrids. But what's the difference between sentient and self-aware? Sentient, they're able to perceive feelings. Self-awareness is the ability for introspection. They have a concept of themselves as separate from other beings. Okay? It's not to be confused with consciousness in the sense of qualia arising from perception. The qualia being that immediate reaction to the sensation. Okay? So, I do go back. So, I do believe Bigfoot is sentient, no doubt. We test for self-awareness, at least in the apes studies. They test for self-awareness by what apes do with a mirror, or grooming behavior suggests that an animal has a sense of itself separate from other beings and other animals. Confabulation. Our mind fills in the blanks. If you can't understand something or you can't remember something, our mind will fill in the blanks. This is why hypnosis and hypnotic testimony is not allowed in court, because the process of hypnosis can introduce memories that are false memories. Here's one. Coincidence versus correlation versus causality. Ice cream. I sat through 2 classes with this professor, and he used this example, and I didn't get it till the second example. Does rising temperatures cause ice cream to melt? I said yes for a long time. It's not a causal relationship. For something to be a causal relationship, there needs to be 100% causality between the 2 things. When ice cream is minus 35 degrees, and you raise that temperature to minus 32 degrees or minus 10 degrees, the ice cream doesn't melt. It stays frozen. It's not until it goes above 31 degrees Fahrenheit that it begins to melt. So there is not a causal relationship between temperatures rising and ice cream melting. That relationship only comes in once it gets above 32 degrees. But when you look at 32 degrees and above, you're missing all this data below. And we can be doing the same thing. We can be doing the same thing with Bigfoot. It's got to be 100%. One of the things we know from these experiences is knocking on a tree doesn't cause Bigfoot to knock back. If it was a causal relationship, every tree knock you do, you get a knock back from Bigfoot. So we already know that much. Coincidence. I wear my polka dotted underwear. I have a Class A sighting. I start wearing my polka dotted underwear every day on every expedition. Sometimes I have a sighting, sometimes I don't. A coincidence is an act or condition of coinciding, as well as the occurrence of events that happen at the same time by accident, but seem to have a connection. correlation, the easiest way to remember this statistic is the word correlation, co-relationship. There's a co-relationship between things. That's what ice cream melting with rising temperatures is. It's not 100% relationship, but there's a strong relationship there. Causality. Ultimately, the only way to prove causality scientifically, and again, make no mistake, I'm advocating a scientific position, but I'm advocating joining that with phenomenologic things going on and figuring out a way to quantify them so we can analyze them and take out opinion and bias. But the only way to prove something scientifically is to show causality, and the only way to show causality is through experimentation. If we don't start doing experiments on expeditions, we're still adding to that anecdotal evidence, but we're not building the structure for future research. Nothing wrong with adding to that foundation. We'll need a strong foundation. But we've been building this foundation for 60 years now, folks, and we don't seem to be any closer to proving it scientifically than we were when we first started. Pictures, stories, audio recordings, they're good evidence, but they haven't been, most of them haven't been statistically analyzed, so the bias potential is huge. You want to see a Bigfoot? Go to one of your Bigfoot areas with your camera and start snapping. The 360 degree panorama. I guarantee you, if you do that and you look at those slides, like we did with the pictures of Bigfoots in the trees where there weren't any, you will find a Bigfoot in the photographs you took that's pareidolia, that's not a Bigfoot. So you got to be careful about what you do and how you interpret. Last but not least, sightings. You may or may not have strong feelings about BFRO one way or another. I'm not here advocating for BFRO, but the BFRO rating system is the only rating system out there at this point. It's the rating system most people use. So I just think it's interesting to read over exactly what it was, because we read it once, and then we start saying, I had a Class A, I had a Class B, Class C, and it's kind of surprising. And again, this is off the BFRO website. The Class A report involves clear sightings in circumstances where misinterpretation of animals can be ruled out with greater confidence. For footprint cases that are very well documented, these are considered Class A reports because misidentification of common animals can be confidentially ruled out. Therefore, misinterpretation can be ruled out. There aren't many of those out there. I think certainly Patty's footprints have been analysis, and you got the video to go along with the footprints, and I think that increases the strength of the evidence. A Class B. Incidents were responsible where a possible Sasquatch was observed at a great distance or in poor lighting conditions. Remember that, in poor lighting conditions, when you're out on the roads and you see a silhouette of what looks like a Bigfoot. It very well might be a Bigfoot, but you probably didn't have a Class A sighting, because the illumination and the observing it indefinitely is important to a Class A. For example, credible reports where nothing has been seen, but a distinct and characteristic sounds of Sasquatches were heard, are always considered Class B reports, and never Class A reports, even in the most compelling sound-only cases. This is because the lack of the visual element raises a much greater potential for misidentification of the sound. Class C reports, second-hand, third-hand reports. A lot of them out there. But pay attention. The astute reader will note that it's not, note that it is the report that's being rated, not the actual experience. They take a report and then the report is read and it's rated. So we're already one step away from reality, whatever that may be, when you rate a report. But unless you're trained, it's tough to rate your own encounter. In conclusion, I believe that experiential and phenomenological evidence are not scientific evidence, but they're important to study scientific evidence. It represents the foundation to building the house of Bigfoot, framing up the structure. I think that we need to work together in those two camps. Again, I said that I got, not in the book, it's not in my book, but I've got an idea to test out telepathy in Bigfoots. And, you know, in closing, why is this even important? Think about intelligence. You can't see it, feel it, touch it. It's not concrete. We can see the results, the product of intelligence, but it's not like intelligence comes along and leaves a big poop in the road that we can see. Okay? So psychology has been successful in quantifying and being able to identify and measure emotions and intelligence, other concepts and ideas. Well, that sounds a lot like Bigfoot to me. Bigfoot is elusive. It's hard to put your hands on him. I believe that we can use the same research techniques and analyses that we use to capture intelligence or love or hate or anger. We can use those same type of technology to capture Bigfoot. Not in a literal sense, but in a statistical sense. The phenomena of Bigfoot we can prove. Thank you.
All right, Dr. John Baranchok. John said at the beginning that he likes to leave the doctor out of it, but I don't like to do that because I have too much respect for John. And he spoke about it a little bit, but I want to touch on it. John has been diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. It also has a tumor on his spine. And if you pray, ask that you please do that for John. Not only is the Bigfoot community better with him in it, I feel like the world is too. I'm not ready to lose my friend. So
it's too high a praise.
keep them in your prayers, guys, please. Thank you, John. All right, we're going to take another probably 10 minutes or so, and then Brian's going to come up and close us out, okay?
Like, yeah.
Yep. Hang out for 10 minutes and we'll be ready.
All right.